I don't need your inheritance, not even for free, her mother-in-law yelled through the intercom to the daughter-in-law abandoned by her husband. And after finding out what had been left to her, Shirley Walker shivered, pulling her worn-out coat tighter around her. The damp, chilling wind cut through to her bones, making her long for the warm home back in the distant village. But there was no home anymore, no grandmother with her herbs, no mother with her constant worrying over her daughter. Only memories remained, along with an eerie sense that life was about to take a sharp turn. Shirley's fingers absent-mindedly touched the silver pendant around her neck, her sole keepsake from her grandmother. Her grandmother had always said, "Wear it, dear. It will protect you and show you the way." Shirley didn't quite believe in such tales, but she never took the pendant off. Maybe it really did help. "Well, Shirley, ready for another workday?" came a friendly voice from behind her. She turned around, smiling at the elderly man in a white coat. "Good morning, Mark." "Of course, I'm ready. You know I'm always eager to help our furry friends." The head doctor of the small veterinary clinic where Shirley had been working for 6 months nodded approvingly. "That's what I appreciate about you, your enthusiasm. No formal education? We'll teach you. What matters is that your heart's in it." Shirley blushed at the compliment. She still found it a miracle that someone in this big city had believed in her, a country girl without a degree. "All right, let's go," Mark Davis gestured towards the clinic. "Our fluffy patients are waiting." Shirley hurried after him, recalling how she'd ended up here. After her mother passed away, she couldn't bear to stay in the empty house, where every corner reminded her of her loss. So, gathering her few belongings, she rushed off to face the unknown. The early days were tough. She spent nights with strangers or at a shelter, unable to find work. After all, who needed an uneducated girl from the countryside? Then, one day, as she passed a veterinary clinic, she saw a sign, "Veterinary assistant needed," and felt something stir inside her, as if her grandmother's pendant had warmed against her chest. "Mark," Shirley began hesitantly, helping him prepare the instruments, "have you ever wondered why I chose your clinic?" The elderly veterinarian chuckled, not looking up from his work. "What's there to think about? I can see you have a natural gift with animals." "Where it came from doesn't matter," Mark replied casually. Shirley hesitated. She suddenly wanted to tell him about her gift, the one that appeared after her fall from a bike. But how could she explain to a rational, educated man that sometimes she just knew how to help animals? She'd look at an object and instantly know what to do next. "You know," she finally ventured, "my grandmother was a fortune teller. She always said this gift was passed down to me, though I never really believed it. But then..." She stopped, noticing how Mark tensed up. He set the tools aside and looked at her intently. "And then what?" "Oh, it's nothing, really." She waved it off, trying to mask her embarrassment. "I fell off my bike as a kid, hit my head, and since then, well, I can just sort of feel things, especially when animals are suffering." Her boss remained silent, thoughtfully rubbing his chin. Shirley immediately regretted bringing it up. He'd probably think she was crazy and fire her on the spot. "Look, Shirley," the vet finally said, "I don't believe in the mystical, but I do believe in intuition. Maybe that's your gift, you feel the pain of living beings better than most." Shirley exhaled with relief. It seemed Mark didn't think she was nuts. "Maybe so," she smiled. "Sometimes it just feels like something more. Like someone's guiding me, showing me what to do." "Well, then listen to that guidance," he nodded, "and let's see where it takes you." "All right, enough chatter, back to work. We're swamped." The day flew by in a blur. Shirley moved like a whirlwind, assisting Mark with procedures, soothing anxious pet owners, and caring for their four-legged patients. By evening, she was exhausted but felt a deep sense of peace. As she was preparing to leave, Shirley noticed a bracelet left behind on the reception desk. It was just a cheap piece of jewelry, but something about it made her wary. She picked it up carefully, and a vivid image flashed before her eyes, a little girl crying over a lifeless kitten. "Hey, Why are you just standing there? Mark called out. Time's up, as they say. Shirley snapped out of it, jolting back to reality. Did anyone bring in a kitten today? The vet frowned. No, I don't think so. Why? Just a feeling, Shirley muttered, slipping the bracelet into her pocket. On the way home, a sense of foreboding clung to her, a feeling that something important was about to happen, and she needed to be ready. Back in her rented room, the first thing she did was pull the bracelet out again, turning it over in her hands, trying to figure out what made it so special. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Standing there was a tearful little girl of about 10, clutching a box from which came a faint, pitiful meowing. Ma'am, please help, the girl sobbed. My Barney is dying. A chill ran down Shirley's spine. This was it, the moment she had foreseen, a chance to save a small life. Don't worry, Shirley said softly, taking the box. We'll help your Barney right away. It was as though some invisible hand was guiding her every move. Shirley knew exactly what to do. An hour later, little Barney was eagerly lapping up milk, his strength returning. The girl couldn't tear her gaze away from her beloved pet, her face beaming with relief. How did you make him better? The girl asked in awe. Are you a witch? Shirley smiled sheepishly. No, sweetheart. I just have a gift for helping those who need it. After the girl left, Shirley collapsed onto the bed, utterly spent. What had that been? Where had that knowledge come from? She recalled her grandmother's words, the time will come when you'll see your path. Could that time really be now? As she drifted off to sleep, Shirley held her grandmother's pendant tightly. She now knew it was more than just jewelry, it was a key to her future. A key she was determined to learn how to use. The next morning, the clinic door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air and a tall man with a dog in his arms. The bell above the entrance gave a shrill ring, startling Shirley. She looked up from the registration log, freezing as she took in the unusual pair. The stranger, dressed in an expensive coat, struggled to balance a large Irish setter. The dog squirmed in his arms, whining and glancing nervously around. His red fur gleamed under the clinic lights, and his long ears twitched anxiously. Stop wriggling, the man muttered, trying to keep his grip on the dog. The setter, as if in response, gave a yelp and jerked forward, clamping his teeth around one of the man's coat buttons. Shirley gasped as the button tore off with a snap, and the dog shook his head triumphantly, holding the trophy in his mouth. Damn it, the man cursed, trying to wrest the button back from the dog. Give it back immediately. But the setter wasn't about to surrender. He shook his head, growling and dodging the man's hands. During the struggle, his injured back leg accidentally brushed against the man's hand, and the dog let out a painful whine. Easy, easy, Shirley intervened, quickly stepping out from behind the counter. Let me help you. She carefully approached the pair. The setter noticed her, froze for a second, then unexpectedly spit out the button and attempted to lick her face. So undisciplined, muttered the man, looking relieved as he handed the dog over to her. Shirley expertly took hold of the dog, gently stroking his head. The setter instantly calmed down, only trembling a little and whimpering whenever he accidentally put weight on his injured leg. There, handsome. We're going to fix you up, she cooed, scratching behind his ear. Meanwhile, the man brushed off his coat and retrieved the unfortunate button from the floor, his face a mix of irritation and fatigue. Good evening, he finally said, looking up at Shirley. This creature needs assistance. Shirley noted a hint of disdain in his tone but focused on the setter, who whimpered again. She redirected her attention to the furry patient. What happened? She asked, gently examining his paw. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. I have no idea. He's my boss's dog. My boss decided to send me here in the middle of the night because his beloved pet, apparently, started limping. Shirley suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. Instead, she smiled at the dog, who, despite the pain, managed to lick her cheek. Don't worry, we'll take care of him. Please, have a seat. And your name is? Brian Owens, the man grumbled, dropping into a chair. Interesting character, Shirley thought as she carried the setter to the examination room. What's with the mask he's wearing, and more importantly, why? Mark, she called out. We've got a patient. The elderly veterinarian bustled out of the back room, pulling on gloves as he went. All right, who do we have here? Looks like a sprain. We'll have him back on his feet in no time. While Mark worked his magic on the dog, Shirley returned to the reception area. Brian, engrossed in his phone, didn't even look up. Don't worry, your companion is going to be fine, she informed him. Brian glanced up from his screen. Great. So, can I leave now? I have a ton of things to do. Shirley was taken aback. But what about the dog? Aren't you going to wait until the procedure is over? He exhaled, clearly irritated. Look, I'm not a dog sitter. My boss said to bring him in, so I did. That's it. But he's a living being. Shirley exclaimed. Don't you feel any compassion for him? Brian shrugged. Compassion is a luxury in business. Everyone has their own job. Mine is in a trading company, not a dog shelter. Shirley felt her anger rise, but then she noticed a slight tremor in Brian's fingers as he put away his phone, and a flicker of something sad in his eyes. You know, she said slowly, sometimes people hide kindness behind a mask of indifference, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Brian looked up, surprised, as if her words had struck a chord. Are you always this perceptive? Shirley blushed. Not really. My grandmother was a fortune teller. She said she passed her gift on to me. Sometimes, I just understand people better than they understand themselves. He raised an eyebrow, his tone edged with irony. So, what do you sense in me? She paused thoughtfully. A person who's hungry for success, but might have lost his way a bit in the process. Brian flinched, as though her words had hit home, but he quickly masked his reaction with indifference. Well, he chuckled. Maybe you should open a fortune-telling shop. Probably more lucrative than tending to sick animals. Shirley shook her head. No way. My calling is to help those who can't ask for it themselves. She hesitated before adding, and people too. Especially those who are afraid to admit they need it. Their eyes met, and Shirley felt as if she had glimpsed the hidden depths of this strange man's soul. Behind the wall of thorns and sarcasm, there was something warm, something alive. Something desperately in need of care. The moment was interrupted by Mark, who emerged from the examination room with the Irish setter, now wagging his tail energetically. There we go. Our patient is happy and healthy. Take your handsome boy, he announced. Brian awkwardly took hold of the dog. Thank you. What do I owe? As Shirley wrote up the bill, she felt his gaze on her. Something had shifted in Brian's expression. He no longer looked down at her. You know, he said, accepting the receipt, you were right. I guess I have lost my way a bit. Maybe we could meet up sometime, talk about fate. Shirley smiled. Why not? It might do us both some good. After Brian left, Shirley stood watching the door for a long time. A little voice whispered inside her that this wouldn't be their last meeting and that it would turn both their lives upside down. Well then, she thought, returning to her work, we'll see what happens. Fate does love its surprises. 3 years later, Shirley sat in the kitchen of the apartment she shared with Brian, stirring her cold tea absent-mindedly. Outside, rain poured down, and it felt as though even nature mourned her broken dreams. How much had changed since that evening? Back then, she thought she had found a kindred spirit. Brian had seemed attentive and caring. He knew how to listen and how to be supportive, and with him, Shirley had found confidence in herself. Their wedding had been simple, just family and a few close friends. Brian's mother had pursed her lips disapprovingly at the country girl, but Brian had stood firm. Mom, I love her, he had said. Please, accept my choice. The first year had felt like a fairy tale. They spent time outdoors, took day trips, and dreamed about the future. Brian had even started taking an interest in Shirley's work, sometimes stopping by the clinic with bags of treats for her four-legged patients. But then, something broke. Shirley couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started. Maybe it was after Brian's promotion fell through again, or when it became painfully clear that they couldn't have a child. She sighed, remembering their rounds of doctors, the herbal remedies, and even the visits to healers in hopes of a miracle. Nothing had helped. And then, the sound of a key turning in the lock made her start. Shirley glanced at the clock, almost midnight. He'd stayed late again with his colleagues, or more likely, with his boss. Brian stumbled into the apartment, peeling off his jacket as he went. He reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. "Shirley," he slurred, "where are you, my darling?" Shirley winced. Once, that term of endearment made her heart flutter. Now, it sounded hollow, like a cracked bell. "I'm in the kitchen," she replied. Brian wobbled his way over, slumping into a chair across from her. "Just had a little time with the guys. You know, the boss insisted, team spirit and all that." Silently, Shirley stood, grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, and set it in front of him. "Drink this and go to bed. You have work tomorrow." He caught her hand. "Shirley, why so cold? I know I've messed up. Don't you see? I have to go all in for this position, otherwise, what's the point?" Something helpless, almost childlike, flickered in his eyes. For a moment, Shirley felt as if she were seeing the Brian she'd once fallen for, the one who hid kindness behind a mask of indifference. "The point of what?" she asked softly. He waved a hand around the kitchen. "All of this. The apartment, the job. I'm doing this for us, so we can have everything we need, so we can have a child." Shirley felt a lump rise in her throat. She'd heard these justifications countless times, and each time, she'd wanted to shout, "I don't need money, I need you, sober, loving, and caring." But instead, she just sighed and said, "Brian, we need to talk. Tomorrow, when you're sober. We can't keep going on like this." He looked at her with bleary eyes. "You're leaving me?" "No," Shirley shook her head. "I'm trying to save you. To save us. But I can't do it alone." Brian nodded, as though he'd reached a decision. "All right. We'll talk tomorrow. I'll make it right, I promise. Just don't leave, okay?" Shirley watched as he stumbled down the hall to the bedroom. Inside her, a war waged between weariness and tenderness, resentment and hope. She remembered once visiting a fortune teller, not a fraud but a true seer, like her grandmother had been. The woman had studied the cards intently, then looked up and said, "Your husband is like a lost child. He needs a guide. But remember, he has to choose his path himself." Shirley went to the window. The rain had stopped, and stars peeked through breaks in the clouds. She touched her grandmother's pendant and whispered, "Give me strength, Grandma. Give me the wisdom to save what can still be saved." For a moment, she could almost feel her grandmother's warm smile somewhere out there in the starlit sky. Months passed, and then it happened, the thing that sooner or later happens to someone who spends too many nights in a bar and then gets behind the wheel. Shirley sat on a hard hospital chair, gripping a tear-dampened tissue in her hands. Her head buzzed with exhaustion and worry. How could this have happened? She asked the universe. Just yesterday, everything had been fine, and now? The scene replayed over and over in her mind, the late-night phone call, the frantic voice on the other end, the race through empty streets, and the glaring lights of the hospital. "Shirley," called a young doctor, stepping out of the intensive care room. She jumped up, almost knocking over the chair. Yes, that's me. How is he?" The doctor rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking weary. "Let's sit down. The news isn't very promising." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her as Shirley slowly sank back into the chair, gripping the armrests. "Tell me," she croaked. "I'm ready." The doctor took a deep breath. Your husband has sustained a severe spinal injury. We did everything we could, but he hesitated, searching for the right words. I'm afraid that a full recovery isn't likely. What does that mean? Shirley whispered, feeling a chill spread through her. It means he'll most likely never walk on his own again. A wheelchair is the most probable outcome. Shirley shut her eyes. Her ears filled with a deafening roar, as if she were underwater. No, 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 pounded in her head. Please, anything but this. Can I see him? She asked, barely able to get the words out. The doctor nodded. Yes, but only for a short time. He just regained consciousness and isn't in the best frame of mind. Shirley stood up, pushed the door open, and entered. Brian lay on the bed, tangled in wires and tubes. His face was pale and gaunt, and there was such rage in his eyes that Shirley instinctively recoiled. Ah, you've come, he hissed through gritted teeth. Came to gawk at me? Brian, she whispered, stepping closer to the bed. How are you? Are you in pain? He grimaced as if he had a toothache. Pain? No, what are you talking about? I'm fantastic, just wonderful. He tried to lift himself up, but immediately fell back onto the pillows with a groan. Ugh, my back. Shirley rushed to him. Easy, easy, don't move. The doctor said. I don't give a damn what he said, Brian snapped. Do you understand what's happened? I'm a cripple, a disabled person, a walking corpse, no, not even walking. Don't say that, Shirley pleaded. We'll get through this. Together, we can overcome anything. Brian laughed, bitterly and spitefully. Together? No way, that's not happening anymore. You're not my wife anymore. Shirley recoiled as if slapped. What? What are you talking about? I mean that I don't want to be a burden, he spat. I don't want you to care for me out of pity. Just leave. Live your own life. But I love you, Shirley exclaimed. I don't want another life. Brian turned his back to her, facing the wall. And I don't want your love. Just go. Shirley stood there, unable to comprehend what was happening. This is a dream, she kept telling herself. A terrible nightmare. I'll wake up now, and everything will be as it was before. But it wasn't a dream, it was reality, cruel and relentless, where her husband, her beloved Brian, had just erased her from his life. She walked out of the room on shaky legs. In the hallway, her mother-in-law awaited her, standing straight as a stick with pursed lips. So, have you two had your little chat? She asked coldly. Shirley nodded, unable to utter a word. Good, her mother-in-law cut her off. Now go home. I'll take care of my son from here. But, Shirley started. No buts, her mother-in-law interrupted. Didn't you hear Brian? You're not his wife anymore. So pack your things and vacate the apartment. You have no business there. Shirley felt nausea rising in her throat. She swayed, grabbing onto the wall. What's happening? Her mind raced. How did we get to this point, and why is she so calm? Her son almost died, and she... But Shirley didn't have time to finish that thought. The world around her spun, and she slipped into darkness. As she exited the hospital, Shirley walked down the street, not paying attention to where she was going. Chaos reigned in her mind, and emptiness filled her soul. The last few weeks had turned into a mad kaleidoscope of events, an accident, the hospital, Brian's harsh words, and her mother-in-law's coldness. How could this happen? She thought. Is our love really that fragile? Is this the end? Suddenly, her phone rang. Shirley mechanically pulled it from her pocket, expecting to see the clinic's number or Mark's name, but an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Hello, she said uncertainly. Shirley Walker, a dry male voice came through the receiver. Yes, this is she. My name is Richard Adams, I'm a notary. I have some rather unexpected news for you. Shirley froze in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling a chill run down her spine. What news? Well, the notary hesitated. You are about to inherit a considerable fortune. I'm inheriting? Shirley looked around in confusion, as if seeking support from passers-by. But this must be a mistake. I don't have any wealthy relatives. You're mistaken, Richard replied. You are the daughter of Michael Hines. Shirley staggered. She leaned against the nearest wall. My father, she whispered. But Mom said he died before I was born. What inheritance? I'm afraid your mother didn't quite tell the whole story. The notary tried to avoid sharp judgments. Michael Hines was alive until recently. Moreover, he was a very successful man, and after his death, you became one of the heirs to his business. And I must emphasize, this is quite a large and profitable business. Thoughts swirled in Shirley's mind like a whirlwind. A father, a millionaire, an inheritance, it was incredible. Well, I still don't understand anything, she mumbled. My dad was wealthy? But then why didn't he take me? Why didn't he help my mom? Unfortunately, I don't have answers to those questions, Richard sighed. But there are documents. You will inherit one of the branches of the company Michael Hines and Partners. You'll need to come by to finalize the paperwork. As Shirley listened to the notary, a sudden hope blossomed within her. Brian, flashed in her mind, I can help him, the best doctors, rehabilitation. Now I'll have the money for that. Thank you, Richard, she said into the phone. I need time to process everything. I'll call you back, okay? Ending the call, Shirley resolutely walked towards her mother-in-law's house. I'll explain everything, she thought. Brian will understand that now anything is possible. Approaching the familiar entrance, she pressed the intercom button. Who's there? A disgruntled voice responded. It's me, Shirley. I need to talk to Brian. It's important. I already told you, you're not his wife anymore. Leave. No, you don't understand, Shirley exclaimed. I have incredible news. I've inherited money, and now I can help Brian. The best doctors, I can arrange for the best treatment. What? Her mother-in-law's voice dripped with disdain. What inheritance? Don't make me laugh, country girl. I don't want your inheritance even for free. It's probably some rundown place in the middle of nowhere. But, Shirley stammered. You don't understand. It's you who doesn't understand, her mother-in-law cut her off. Get out, and don't you dare come back here. The line went dead with a series of short beeps. Shirley leaned her forehead against the cold door frame in despair. Why? She thought, why doesn't she want to listen to me? Does she really hate me that much? After standing there for a moment longer, Shirley slowly walked away. A storm of conflicting feelings surged within her, hurt, despair, anger. But somewhere deep among them lay the most important feeling, determination. It's okay, she thought, clenching her fists. I won't give up. Brian needs help, whether he wants it or not. And I will find a way to help him, no matter what it takes. With these thoughts in mind, she headed home to gather her things and prepare for a new chapter in her life. Shirley froze in front of the mirror in the hallway, absently smoothing out the wrinkles in her brand new sea green suit. Today, she was about to step into the uncharted waters of big business for the first time. She was going to enter the office of the company that had suddenly become her own. What have I gotten myself into? Flashed through her mind. I don't know the first thing about commerce. The only thing I know how to do is straighten out crooked paws and give IVs to furry patients. She let out a loud breath, trying to calm the trembling in her knees. No, there was no turning back. This was her only chance to pull Brian from the depths of despair. Whether she wanted to or not, she would have to learn to swim in shark-infested waters. Sliding out of the entrance, Shirley caught a taxi. Throughout the ride, her thoughts circled around her mother-in-law. What's going on in that woman's head? She wondered. Has maternal love really evaporated from her? The car stopped at the foot of a gleaming skyscraper made of glass and metal. Shirley paid and took a deep breath before stepping into the cool interior of the revolving door. "Good morning," she addressed the girl at the reception desk. "I'm Shirley Walker. I have an appointment." "Oh, Miss Walker," the girl brightened. "They've been waiting for you. Please head up to the 15th floor. The conference room is to the right of the elevator." The elevator soared upward, carrying Shirley toward her new life. The doors opened, revealing a spacious lobby. There, an imposing man with silver hair was already waiting for her. "Shirley, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Michael Hines and Partners," he exclaimed, beaming. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Vincent Kelly, the company's chief attorney. Please, follow me." In the conference room, 3 more men were waiting. As Shirley entered, they all stood up in unison. "Allow me to introduce, this is the team of consultants your father left behind," Vincent began. "Bradley Vargas, our financial guru, Jay Parker, the sales ace, and Timothy Johnson, a genius in strategic planning." Shirley nodded at each of them, feeling like a rabbit in front of a team of snakes. "Make yourselves comfortable," Vincent suggested. "This conversation will be a long one." The next few hours turned into a real slideshow of numbers and graphs, generously sprinkled with unfamiliar terms. Shirley desperately tried to grasp something familiar and reassuring amid the chaotic flow of information. But it didn't work. She was hopelessly drowning. "Don't be shy," Bradley encouraged her, noticing her bewildered expression. "We're here to support you. Together we can move mountains." Shirley forced a grateful smile, but inside she felt a lingering bitterness. Something in the financier's tone scratched at her ears, making her wary. "Stop overthinking it," she chastised herself. "It's just nerves. These people want to help, and here you are suspecting them of something." When the prolonged meeting finally concluded, Shirley stumbled out onto the street, feeling like a gutted fish. She collapsed onto a bench in the square across from the office, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. What have I signed up for? Whirled in her mind. How can I keep such a massive ship afloat? What if I sink everything my father built? But as soon as she remembered Brian's weary face, determination flared up in her chest once more. "No, I can't afford to give up. For his sake, I'll learn all the intricacies of this snake pit." That evening, after stepping over the threshold of her rented apartment, Shirley discovered a message from her mother-in-law on the answering machine. "Shirley, it's Mary. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. I looked into things and found out about the inheritance. Maybe we should meet to discuss everything. I'm sure together we can help Brian." Shirley froze, her finger hovering over the delete button. Had the ice finally broken? Could her mother-in-law help reach her stubborn son? But something in Mary's voice set off alarm bells. There was a false, calculating quality to it. "No," Shirley decided after a moment's reflection. "First, I'll sort out the company's affairs, then I'll think about how to break through to Brian. Even if it means going against his will and his mother's schemes." She couldn't have imagined the storms awaiting her ahead, but her intuition, honed over the years, persistently whispered, "Stay alert, keep your ears open." Well, thought Shirley as she climbed under the covers, tomorrow a new chapter of my life begins. I'll do everything I can not to miss this chance, even if it means jumping higher than I ever thought I could. Shirley sat in her office, absorbed in studying yet another stack of documents. It had long since grown dark outside, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. There was too much new information to master. "Well, it seems like everything is in order," she murmured, signing the last sheet with a flourish. "At least I've made some progress." The door creaked open slightly. A young man in a maintenance uniform appeared in the doorway, holding a mop and a bucket. "Excuse me," he said, smiling awkwardly. "I thought everyone had left by now. Is it okay if I clean up?" Shirley waved her hand dismissively. Yes, of course. I was just about to leave, too." She began gathering her papers into her briefcase, glancing at the janitor out of the corner of her eye. Something about his movements seemed off, too confident for someone in his line of work. "How long have you been working here?" she asked casually. The young man paused for a moment, then continued pushing the mop across the floor. "Not long, actually. Just about 3 months." "And how do you like it?" He shrugged. "It's a job like any other. Not dusty, but not in that way. They pay on time, can't complain." Shirley nodded, hiding a smile. The young man was clearly not telling the whole truth. "I see you're working late," the janitor remarked. "Must be tough to get used to all the new things?" "No kidding," Shirley sighed. "Sometimes it feels like I'm lost in a dense forest. At least the consultants help me figure things out." The young man suddenly froze, as if he had hit an invisible wall. "So, the consultants are helping you," he repeated, and there was a strange note in his voice. "And how often do you consult with them?" Shirley raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Well, yes, constantly." "Why?" The janitor hesitated, clearly wavering, then resolutely set the mop aside. "Listen, are you really sure these people actually want to help you?" "What do you mean?" Shirley asked, taken aback. "In a direct way." He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I overheard something while I was cleaning the office next door," he said. "They don't pay any attention to me. Anyway, it seems to me that your consultants are plotting something, and it's definitely not in your favor." Shirley felt a chill run down her spine. "On what grounds are you eavesdropping on other people's conversations? And why should I believe you?" The young man gave a bitter smile. "I'm nobody, just a janitor, but you know, sometimes it's those who are considered insignificant that see the most." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, then continued. "My name is Harold, and I once studied economics. I didn't finish, but I know the basics. And trust me, what I heard doesn't sound like concern for your well-being. But they're helping me." Harold shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Do you really understand everything in those papers you're signing?" "Well," Shirley hesitated. "There are a few terms, but they explain everything to me." "And what did they explain to you?" he asked gently. Shirley opened her mouth and then closed it again. She couldn't recall a single substantial explanation, only promises that everything would be fine. "Am I really that foolish?" she whispered. Harold shook his head. "No, just inexperienced, and they're taking advantage of that." He walked over to her desk and picked up the top sheet from the stack. "Here, for example. Do you even understand what this says?" Shirley squinted at the small print. "Something about transferring rights to the controlling stake of shares," Harold grimly finished. "You're signing a paper that hands over control of the company to someone else." Shirley felt her head spin. "So why didn't they tell me?" "Because it benefits them," Harold shrugged. "And you're just a pawn in a bigger game." "What should I do?" Shirley whispered. Harold thoughtfully rubbed his chin. "First of all, don't sign anything else without thorough verification. We need to figure out what these consultants have already done." He paused, then hesitantly added, "And if you want, I can help. I understand a bit about this." Shirley looked up at him. "What's in it for you?" Harold gave a sad smile. "Nothing. I once believed the wrong people and lost everything, my education, my freedom, even my mother. I don't want anyone else to go through that." In his eyes flickered a genuine pain that made Shirley instinctively reach out her hand. "Tell me." And Harold shared how he fell head over heels for the most beautiful girl in his class, how he got into a fight with a local authority figure for her sake, how he ended up in prison for 2 years, and how he returned to a completely different world where neither his beloved nor his mother awaited him, nor any future. "Since then, I've been learning how to live all over again," he concluded. "And you know what? It turns out that it's from the very bottom that you can see things that you can't discern from the top." Shirley remained silent, struck by his story, then resolutely stood up. "I would be glad to have your help." He smiled for the first time throughout their conversation. Well then, let's get started. There's a lot of work to do. And where do we begin? Harold pulled a chair up to the table. First, let's figure out what exactly you've already signed. Let's take a look at this stack of documents. The next few hours were spent sorting through the papers. Harold patiently explained the meaning of each clause and each term. Gradually, a disheartening picture began to take shape before Shirley. They've stripped me bare, she whispered, leaning back in her chair. And I let them do it. Harold sympathetically patted her hand. Not everything is lost. Really? Shirley asked hopefully. Really, he nodded. Look here and here, he pointed at the documents, there are loopholes. If we act quickly, we can reverse everything. But how? Shirley furrowed her brow. I can't just walk in and say, sorry, I changed my mind. Harold squinted playfully. And here's where it gets interesting. You can, you're the branch manager. You're not even obligated to explain yourself. Just say you changed your mind, and that's it. It's a management decision, understood? Shirley hesitantly nodded. But what if they don't listen to me? Harold smirked. Oh, they'll listen, they won't have a choice. You're the boss. The key is confidence. Oh, easy for you to say, Shirley sighed. My knees are shaking just thinking about that conversation. Hey, you'll manage. You've treated animals, these predators are just small fry compared to a tiger. Shirley couldn't help but smile. Well, I haven't treated a tiger, just a Rottweiler at most. See? Harold winked. Think of it as 3 Rottweilers, who, by the way, should listen to you. The next morning, Shirley called all 3 consultants into her office. Gentlemen. She tried to make her voice sound firm. I've decided to annul all previously signed documents regarding this project. A heavy silence fell over the room. Vincent was the first to regain his composure. Excuse me, what? Shirley, are you out of your mind? More than that, she cut him off. I've changed my mind. Bradley, the financial consultant, turned crimson. But we've invested so much effort. In tricking me? Shirley interrupted. Oh yes, you've done quite well. Jay, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Shirley, let's not rush into things. Maybe we didn't explain something clearly? Let's sit down and talk it over calmly. No, Shirley cut him off. No more discussions. You're all fired. You can't do that, Vincent shrieked. We have a contract. A contract that I'm terminating, Shirley shot back. Right now. She felt her insides trembling, but she maintained an unyielding exterior. You'll regret this, Bradley hissed. We'll sue. Go ahead, Shirley shrugged. My lawyers will gladly dig deep. I'm sure you'll enjoy that. The consultants exchanged glances. Fear flickered in their eyes. Fine, Vincent said unexpectedly calmly. We'll leave, but you'll come to regret this decision. Mark my words. As the door closed behind them, Shirley collapsed weakly into her chair. She was shaking. Well, how was that? Harold's voice rang out. He had quietly entered the room. I feel like I just jumped off a cliff without a parachute, Shirley muttered, and I haven't crashed, yet. Harold smiled. You did great. You handled it excellently. Really? Shirley looked up at him. But it feels like the scariest part is still ahead. I have no idea how to run a company. You'll learn, Harold said confidently. She studied him closely. Harold, I want to bring you onto my team. Are you willing to change your field of work? He shrugged. You know, I've long understood that it's not about what you do, but why you do it. And right now, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. Shirley smiled. Well then, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Mary paced the living room, glancing at her phone from time to time. Her face, usually maintaining a mask of noble restraint, was now twisted in a grimace of frustration and impatience. "Where is he?" she hissed through gritted teeth. "Is it really so hard to make a call on time?" As if in response to her words, the phone erupted into a piercing ring. Mary snatched up the receiver, nearly dropping it from her trembling hands. "Hello, yes, it's me." "Well, go ahead," she urged. With each word from the other end, her eyes glinted with a predatory light. "So it's all true?" Her voice quivered with barely contained triumph. "We need to proceed with caution." Mary's lips stretched into a satisfied smile. "Excellent. If this works out, you won't be at a loss." After hanging up, she closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the anticipation of victory. Then she headed to her son's room. Brian sat by the window. His once fit figure had slumped, and pain lingered in his eyes. "Brian," Mary called gently. "We need to talk." He didn't even turn his head. "What about, Mom? How much of a failure I am?" Mary winced, but composed herself. "Sweetheart, I wanted to talk about Shirley. She left you, and now she's wallowing in luxury. It's not fair." "She left?" Brian spun around sharply, anger flaring in his eyes. "I was the one who pushed her away. I did it myself." "But you weren't yourself," his mother gently countered. "You didn't understand what you were saying. She could have fought for you, for your marriage, but she chose to just walk away. Of course, why would she want a cripple?" Brian opened his mouth to retort, but fell silent. "I thought," Mary continued, "that you have every right to a portion of her assets if you two divorce. After all, you're still married." Brian furrowed his brow. "You think I should file for divorce?" With a division of assets, his mother insisted firmly. "It would be fair, wouldn't it?" Brian remained silent, and she rushed to build on her success. "Think about all the possibilities this would give you: better doctors, rehabilitation. You could get back on your feet again." "But—" Brian hesitated. "Isn't that low?" "Low?" Mary threw her hands up in exasperation. "And leaving your husband in distress is noble in your eyes? No, son, you deserve better, and I will help you get it." She tenderly stroked his cheek, and Brian instinctively leaned into her touch, reminiscent of when he was a child, and she comforted him after yet another setback. "All right," he whispered barely audibly. Mary smiled triumphantly, but quickly concealed her glee. The money would do its job. They would shake every last penny out of that upstart. Meanwhile, a tense atmosphere reigned in the company office. Employees whispered to each other, nervously glancing at the director's door. "Did you see that?" hissed the thin, wiry secretary, leaning toward her colleague. "She brought in that ragamuffin and made him the manager." "Yeah," her colleague shook his head. "We've hit rock bottom. Pretty soon, couriers will be running the place." Their murmurs were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Shirley emerged from her office, followed closely by Harold. "Colleagues," she announced loudly, "allow me to introduce our new manager, Harold Allen." A discontented murmur ran through the office, which Shirley resolutely silenced. "I know this is an unexpected decision for many, but it's my decision, and I ask you to give Harold a chance to prove himself." He shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, but when he spoke, his voice was confident. "I understand your doubts, but I promise I will handle this, and I sincerely hope for your support." Shirley smiled as she observed the reactions of those present. "Yes, it won't be easy for him, but I believe he can do it." In the evening, after most employees had left, she lingered in her office, troubled thoughts swirling in her mind. "Harold," she called. "Please come in." He appeared within seconds, as if he had been waiting just outside the door. "Is something wrong?" Shirley sighed. "Yes, or rather, something might go wrong. I need your advice." She told him about Brian. "I have to help him," Shirley concluded. "But for that, I'll need to withdraw some funds from the company's operations. How much do you think we can afford without harming the business?" Harold furrowed his brow, calculating something in his mind. Shirley, I understand your feelings, but I must warn you, any withdrawal right now would be extremely risky. We're teetering on the edge. Is it really that bad? Shirley asked quietly. Harold shook his head. Let's put it this way, our business is like a tightrope walker over a chasm. One wrong move, and we all go crashing down. Shirley bit her lip. Still, is there no way? There is, but it will be very risky. We could free up some funds if... He didn't finish. A knock sounded at the door. A flustered secretary appeared in the doorway. Shirley, there's an urgent call from the hospital. Her heart plummeted. She grabbed the receiver. Hello, yes, it's me. What? Oh my God. Her face paled, and her hands trembled. Of course, I'll be there right away. Hanging up, Shirley turned to Harold. Brian, he fell from his wheelchair. Her voice broke. He might be left completely paralyzed. Harold nodded decisively. I understand. We'll figure something out. You go, and I'll take care of the finances. Shirley gratefully squeezed his hand. Thank you. The hospital was in chaos. Shirley darted from one doctor to another, trying to get clear explanations. You see, the elderly surgeon patiently explained to her, the situation is critical. An urgent operation is necessary, or he'll be left a cripple for life, if he even survives. We need a blood donor. I can donate, Shirley said without hesitation. The doctor shook his head. Unfortunately, your blood is unlikely to be suitable. He has a very rare blood type and a negative Rh factor. We need someone close, ideally his mother. Her mother-in-law appeared in the corridor. What are you doing here? She snapped. Shirley, pushing aside her resentment, rushed to her. Mary, thank God you're here. Brian needs your blood. A shadow of fear crossed her mother-in-law's face. I can't, she muttered. I have a poor tolerance. What? Shirley couldn't believe her ears. What do you mean, poor tolerance? This is about your son's life. She spent several minutes trying to persuade the stubborn woman until, finally, Mary relented under the weight of general indignation. Fine, Mary said through clenched teeth. Shirley sighed in relief, but her joy was short-lived. Half an hour later, Mary emerged from the lab, followed by a nurse with a bewildered expression. I'm sorry, but the blood isn't suitable. What do you mean, not suitable? The doctor exclaimed. Do the test again and try to find other donors. Shirley sat in the hospital corridor, feeling drained. Finally, a ray of hope appeared. The doctors reported that her husband's condition had stabilized. He will live, that thought pulsed in her mind. Shirley, a doctor's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You can go to your husband. He's come to. She nodded, slowly getting up. Her legs felt like lead. Why don't I feel joy? A treacherous thought flickered through her mind. Brian lay pale and gaunt, entangled in wires and tubes. When he saw his wife, a weak smile touched his lips. Hi, he rasped. You look terrible. Shirley couldn't help but snort. Look at yourself, handsome. An awkward pause hung in the air. She perched on the edge of the bed, unsure of what to say. Thank you, Brian suddenly said. For everything. I know that without you. He trailed off, coughing. Don't strain yourself. Shirley stroked his hand gently. You need to rest. Brian grasped her palm. No, listen, I have to say this. I've acted like the worst jerk. Forgive me. Instead of the expected wave of tenderness, Shirley felt only emptiness and exhaustion. It's all right, she replied quietly. The important thing is that you're alive. Brian looked at her intently. You've changed, you look better. She felt a twinge of embarrassment. Oh, come on. I haven't slept in days and I look like a scarecrow. No, it's not that. You seem more confident, stronger. Brian paused, then added, You know, I've never been worthy of you. Shirley flinched. What are you saying? The truth. I've always known it, I just was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. A new light flickered in his eyes. Shirley, we need to talk when I'm feeling a bit stronger, okay? She nodded silently. As she left the room, Shirley ran into Mary. Her mother-in-law looked unusually disoriented. How is he? Mary asked hoarsely. He's going to live, Shirley replied briefly, but he will need long-term rehabilitation. Mary nodded. I understand. We need to talk. Shirley gestured to the papers with the test results taken before the surgery. They settled into a small hospital cafeteria. Shirley watched in surprise as her usually composed mother-in-law's hands trembled when she brought the coffee cup to her lips. I would like to understand, Shirley said simply. Yes, Mary replied. You've always been smart, and of course, you figured it all out. Not everything, Shirley countered. But enough to see the lies. Mary fell silent. Shirley looked at her, running through the entire situation with the test results in her mind. I'm not Brian's biological mother, Mary finally forced out. What? Yes, you heard me right. Many years ago, a rather wealthy woman approached me. She had a delicate problem. She was pregnant by her lover. Her husband would never forgive the betrayal. Mary gave a grim smile. I was barely making ends meet at the time. Alone, with no prospects, and then this offer came along, to raise someone else's child for a decent sum of money. How could I refuse? Shirley was silent, stunned by this revelation. Everything went smoothly, the money arrived regularly. I raised the boy and even grew attached to him. And then... She fell silent. What happened then? Shirley asked quietly. About a year ago, the payment stopped, Mary replied hollowly. Suddenly, without explanation. I tried to contact that woman, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Mary raised her eyes. You can't imagine how I felt. Like I was used and thrown away. Just seeing Brian, she faltered. He reminded me of that humiliation every single day. Shirley shook her head in disbelief. And that's why you started to hate your own son, whom you raised for so many years. Yes, I know. It's terrible, Mary whispered. I hate myself for it, but I couldn't handle the hatred. And then the accident happened, and... She didn't finish, but suddenly Shirley understood everything. You decided this was a chance to get rid of a burden, she asked sharply. That's why you turned Brian against me? Yes. Shirley silently looked at the broken woman before her. Anger battled with pity. Well, Shirley finally said, thank you for explaining. And you know, Mary, you should see a psychologist. The following days were challenging. Shirley was torn between the hospital and the office, trying to keep both her husband and the business afloat. Harold became her true support. He managed to address dozens of issues arising in the office, allowing her to spend more time with Brian. How are we doing? She asked, stopping by the office between hospital visits. Harold smiled. Better than we could have expected. We're pulling through. Thank you. She gratefully squeezed his hand. Their eyes met, and suddenly Shirley felt awkward. That evening, she sat in Brian's hospital room. Shirley, he suddenly began, I've been thinking a lot and I've come to the conclusion that it's better for us to part ways. She looked sadly at her husband. Why? Because I never loved you the way you deserve. I respected you, yes, I had affection for you, of course, but never love. He shook his head. It was never like that. Shirley remained silent. Please don't cry. You're an amazing woman, and I will only be a burden. You're not a burden. No, I am. And it's not just about my injury. You saved me from it, and I'm grateful, truly grateful, but I'm not good enough for you. I just didn't understand it before. Brian reached out, gently touching her cheek. Let me go and be happy. A week later, Shirley filed for divorce. To her surprise, everything went smoothly. Brian waived any claims to her assets. I think you've already shared enough with me by covering my surgery and rehabilitation, he said with a crooked smile. As she exited the courthouse, Shirley felt a strange lightness, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She pulled out her phone. Harold, it's me. I need your advice and just to talk. A sense of surprising peace settled in her heart. A year later, Shirley stood by the window, lost in thought. Her gaze slid across a photograph on the table. It was of them and Harold on their wedding day. Who would have thought that a janitor would elevate the company to a new level? And then something more had developed in their relationship. Her thoughts involuntarily shifted to Brian. Incredibly, she felt very warm feelings toward her ex-husband. Their divorce had initially seemed like a tragedy, but by following that path, everyone had found happiness. Brian had discovered it in the form of a caregiver who looked after him after his injury. Shirley shook her head, marveling at the whims of fate. Who knows how her life would have turned out if she hadn't met Harold? She could have lost the company, continued living in an unhappy marriage, never knowing what true love was. And tomorrow, she and Harold were going to Brian and Arlene's housewarming party. Shirley was genuinely happy for her ex-husband. They had both found their paths to happiness. What are you thinking about? Harold's warm and familiar voice pulled her from her reverie. I hope we don't face another stunt from Mary tomorrow, she smiled. We won't. She's changed. The psychologist you paid for is working wonders. Shirley wanted to say something in response, but just then, there was a knock at the door. An anxious secretary appeared in the doorway. Shirley, something is happening. What's wrong, Thelma? Shirley frowned. Some people have arrived. They say they're heirs, your father's children, and they demand to meet with you. There it was. The thing she had secretly feared all this time. Shirley nodded and squared her shoulders. Invite them in. Two people entered, a tall, graying man in his 40s and a young woman with cold blue eyes. Step-siblings. Here we are at last. Good afternoon, she said as calmly as she could. The stranger stepped forward, giving her a scrutinizing look. So, you're the illegitimate daughter? Well, at least you resemble your father. And who are you? Matthew Hines, the man snapped. And this is my sister, Michelle Hines. We are the rightful heirs of Michael Hines. Michelle, who had remained silent until now, scoffed derisively. And we've come to take what rightfully belongs to us. Shirley felt something inside her boil over. Excuse me. What are you talking about? I have all the documents proving. We don't care about your papers, Matthew barked. You grabbed the best piece and are enjoying it. Are we second-class people? Michelle placed a hand on her brother's shoulder, as if calming him. Matthew, don't get worked up. We agreed to handle this civilly. She turned to Shirley. Listen, we're offering a good deal. You hand over control of the company, and we'll give you, say, 15% of the profits. Not bad, right? Shirley couldn't believe her ears. Are you serious? I'm just supposed to hand over the business to you? The business that our father built for years, Michelle interrupted. And you just claimed it all for yourself. I didn't claim anything. He bequeathed it to me. Matthew stepped closer, his face reddening. Well, since this isn't working out nicely. Suddenly, Harold stepped between them. Gentlemen, I think it's time for you to leave, or I'll call security. Matthew regarded him with a scornful look. And who are you? The company manager and Shirley's husband. Michelle laughed. Oh, sister, you're not wasting any time. Already got yourself a husband to whom you can transfer the business and dilute our shares. Shirley felt her hands tremble with rage. Get out of here immediately. We'll be back, Matthew hissed, and then you'll regret it. As the door slammed shut behind the uninvited guests, Shirley sank into a chair, feeling utterly drained. "My God, Harold, what was that?" He sat down beside her, taking her hand. "It looks like the beginning of a war." A nagging sense of dread stirred within her. "So what do we do?" Harold thoughtfully rubbed his chin. "For starters, we need to strengthen our legal defenses." He didn't finish his thought. The office door burst open, and a flustered Thelma rushed in. "Shirley, the tax audit is on its way." Shirley exchanged glances with her husband. "Here we go." But she was no longer the bewildered girl from the province. She was the master of her fate and her business. A week later, she sat in her chair, absently rubbing her barely noticeable belly. Her gaze wandered around the office, not focusing on anything in particular, while the words of the doctor echoed in her mind from that morning. "Shirley, you must avoid any stress. There's a risk of miscarriage. If you want to keep the baby, no worries." "No worries," she muttered, "easy for you to say." Yet it seemed fate had decided to test their resilience. Just a week later, her half-brother and sister attempted to take over the company outright. In the heat of the moment, Shirley felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. The world spun around her, and she fell into darkness. She awoke in the hospital. The first thing she saw was the worried face of her husband. "Harold," she whispered. "The baby. It's alive," he breathed out. "Everything's fine." "And the company?" Shirley asked, fearing the answer. "You won't believe it, but we won." "How?" "Thanks to Mary." He sat down on the edge of the bed. Shirley raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What does she have to do with this?" "She's the reason behind it all," Harold laughed. "That woman is a real detective. She managed to track down the very woman who once gave Brian up." "No way. And who is she? And what does that have to do with business?" "She's the wife of a very influential man, extremely influential. And Mary told her everything about us. More precisely, about you. That woman called someone, and suddenly all the claims vanished." Shirley couldn't believe her ears. "But why did Mary help?" "She said it was her way of thanking you for not turning your back on her after everything she did," Harold replied quietly. "And she's also very grateful to you for Brian. After all, he's still her son. She couldn't help but love him." "Incredible." "Indeed." He gently stroked her cheek. "Now rest." Shirley smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "You know, we really are lucky." "More than you know," her husband winked. Left alone, Shirley listened to her feelings. Inside her, a new life pulsed beneath her heart. A life for which it was worth going through all the trials. "Well, little one, it seems the worst is behind us. Now only good things await us, right?" And as if in response to her words, she felt a slight flutter, the first, still faint movement of the baby. Shirley burst into tears and then laughed, for life goes on, and it is beautiful. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best.